Hi, welcome. Thanks for joining us at CDCon today and taking part in the panel. Maybe it is better you introduce yourself. So starting with you, Sarah.
Sure.
Maybe you can say a few words about yourself.
I'd be happy to. I'm a longtime open source nerd. I lead open source strategy for Microsoft, and I report into the Azure office of the CTO. But for fun, I get to play with lots of open source communities, including many here today or here this week, as well as many that will be back here in Austin in 3 weeks.
Thank you. Hong?
Oh, yeah, my name is Hong, so I'm the CEO of the Akuity. So I was the original author of the Argo, so we created the Argo project about 6 years ago. So right now we basically are running this enterprise company for Argo as the Akuity. Thank you.
Thanks, Hong. Isaac?
How's it going? I'm Isaac Mosquera. I work on container and serverless strategy at AWS.
Hey, I'm Tim. I'm a lead software engineer at Kainos. I've always been passionate about automation and avoiding doing manual work, so continuous delivery me and a great fit. And I've been the Jenkins release officer for the last couple of years as well.
Thanks all. So in order for us to start talking about future, maybe we should perhaps talk about today's state of affairs. And as we have been talking about, Continuous Delivery Foundation released the State of CD report today, and there are interesting findings in it. And overall, the report looks pretty good. We are improving, but I think we can improve more. So what are your thoughts on the challenges organizations are facing and how we can address them? Maybe we can start with you, Sarah.
I can start. I think frequently the largest challenge is adoption and the cultural change necessary for this, because tools are very important, but when you have engineers or leaders who have grown up in the industry equating deployments with faults and risk, it's a big change to lift and move through. It isn't as easy as which tool fits our needs, which tool should we choose.
Oh, yeah, in my opinion, I think nowadays it's, the infrastructure is getting way complicated. We are talking about VM in the private data center. We are talking about the Kubernetes is a buzzword everywhere. And we are also talking about the serverless. And it just getting like overly complicated. And then there are so many tools addressing different problems. And in the end, like how you can deliver the unified experience for your developers, that is kind of like, to me, it's a big, big challenge.
Thanks, Hong.
Yeah, well, first I agree with what the first two speakers said.
We can disagree too, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
But to add on that, I think there's also, compliance and regulation and how that was applied in the world of VM and infrastructure and when it was physical, and trying to take that into the virtual world that we're in now, when you mentioned serverless, Kubernetes, all of that, mixing kind of these rules and regulations that were created 20 years ago into today's world is very hard and left up to a lot of interpretation. And you see a lot of, I think, Sarah, you were talking about the people in the organizations, a lot of conflict and discussion around how to move forward in this new, more virtual world versus the physical world that we kind of used to live in, and that slows down progress as well.
Change control.
Yeah. We don't have enough time. So.
No, sorry.
Anything you want to add, Tim?
Yeah, I think Sarah put it very well. But for me, it really comes down to people and processes. Yeah. It's about those rules that were probably put there for a reason, but it's about putting other processes in place and automation and protection and safety in there and making it a very safe culture that's improved over time. And I think it's also really important to have buy-in from the top levels, so have it sort of management understanding and helping removing barriers. Because a lot of these barriers for people, it's kind of their job to do these sort of things. It's how it's been done for so long, and it's about just changing that job. So it's not about removing it, but it's about changing it into what it can do now and in the future.
And to that exact point, you have to have a learning culture. You have to be able to fail. You have to be able to have a discussion when my job changes, and you have to be able to model and engage with that in a way that then moves everyone forward to the better state.
Thank you. I think you mentioned, Sarah, when you started, like tools are important, process and culture more important. But if we go back to technology and think about CI/CD ecosystem, in Container Foundation we have 8 projects, and most of those projects work well with each other. But the users have to integrate those technologies to each other, and could that be considered an issue, automating things, bringing up pipelines, and if interoperability within CI/CD ecosystem would help adoption of those technologies for different organizations?
Anybody want to field it first?
Tim, I think you had.
Yeah, so I think there's so many like CI/CD tooling out there, and bringing interoperability in will allow us to like chain these together in a better way. Historically, all the CI/CD tools have been very different, and it'll be interesting to see what interoperability can do out there. There's quite a few things going on, like there's the cloud events to help chain those events through and help these tools work together. OpenTelemetry is a great example of a success in this area with interoperability, with so many vendors able to work together, and instead of having to implement integrations for 6 different like APM platforms, you can just write it once, and then you don't have to write another one. And then recently with the open feature management, there's another very similar one. So yeah, very interested to see how this goes, but just not sure currently.
Would you like to add anything, Hong?
Yeah, so my view is a little bit different. I feel the direction is we want to unify the infrastructure to some extent. So I'm from the Kubernetes perspective more. That's why I'm more believer of the Kubernetes will be the Linux for operating system. Basically, when you're talking about multiple clusters, you're talking about the Kubernetes in the end. So as AKS, EKS, and GKE, everything is so readily available nowadays. So I'm truly believing with that direction. So in that sense, I feel a lot of infrastructure, a lot of the companies, when you are thinking about a problem, you are thinking more a little bit, you can be more thinking about bottom up. What is your future? Are you betting on the Kubernetes as the de facto solution? Then maybe you are picking the tools towards in that direction. Because I'm talking about more about the Kubernetes native more, in my opinion, it's not about cloud native, it's actually Kubernetes native. Means you can still run in your Kubernetes cluster at edge. Even in your private data center, there are so many distributions, like certified, conformant Kubernetes distributions there. Well, you can using the same CI/CD tool to deploy everywhere, but you have to unify your infrastructure layer and using Kubernetes as abstraction. That is my personal opinion, yeah.
Want to add anything?
Well, I think we do see a lot of adoption of Kubernetes, but I think what makes it challenging is that when you look at the clouds and the rate that they're innovating, the pace is moving so fast that we see organizations that decide to go all in on serverless or Lambda, and it's hard to kind of unify. So I think interoperability is going to be important, and we see that I think in like I'll give you an example here with Lambda, which is we support the packaging runtime, the Docker, the Docker packaging inside of Lambda, right? So the fact that the industry has coalesced around some of these standards allow for that interoperability to happen. So the more open standards that we can all agree on and move forward on, I think play a critical role in the adoption of technology and enabling certain companies to do what's best for them, which may or may not be Kubernetes. I know a lot of companies where Kubernetes is the right choice, but I think the more we're able to allow them to kind of move their workloads around and their compute around and use what's best for them is what's going to really drive CI/CD forward, so that they can actually continue to use the CI/CD tools for different compute platforms. We don't even know what's going to come out next year or the year after that, which I'm sure there's going to be a bunch of new innovation from all the vendors.
You're singing my song because you're really just saying interoperability is important, but what we end up doing is we build a few things, we find a winner, we find a group that coalesces around it, becomes a de facto standard, Kubernetes being one of the modern de facto standards, And then over time, it gets codified into what we used to start with in standards. So 25 years ago, you used to start with a 2-year vendor discussion to try to decide how things were going to interop. Now we build a bunch of stuff, we get it to interop, we get it to kind of interop, and then we eventually go, yeah, that needs to be modeled more like that. Yeah, it needs to move over. And then that allows the proliferation of solutions that cover many more of the vertical stacks of things, as well as the work that we see in enterprises moving toward the continuous delivery, continuous integration, greater reliability, greater mean time to repair, et cetera.
Thank you. My next question is actually related to this because some organizations may want to go to manage CI/CD services instead of dealing with integration or waiting for interoperability to happen. And the latest release of State of CD reports also highlights that there is an increase in percentage of organizations moving to manage CI/CD services. But do you consider this as a risk for future of continuous delivery because those services could result in lock-in effects like GitHub Actions, Azure pipelines, or what do you think?
I'm happy to jump in and say that every customer has to sit and look at what their risk profile is for change. And some things are easier to change than others, as we all know in tech. And developing a plan where you take appropriate risks and take risks which you can support is really the best way to look at this. I will always argue for open source solutions or solutions that have an open source parallel or a standard or a de facto standard that may exist in open source as well. But we have to balance in the development, the pace at which we can do these things. Maybe it's to get a new feature out quickly. We need to get this as opposed to building out a new system. It ends up being a very complex.
Yeah. I think to add on to that is in that balance and really understanding, which is, okay, what's the actual cost of this vendor lock-in, which is, yes, there's a cost to it, but that cost is what it takes to actually move away from that position versus its benefits. If the benefits far outweigh the cost of moving it, meaning if I get a year's worth of a developer's time and benefit versus the cost to move from this solution to this solution is only going to cost me a month, then it's a no-brainer. I get 11 months of added benefit, right? And so and the reality is in a lot of the cases, because actually the last topic that we were just talking about, interoperability, so many of these things work so well together that the cost of lock-in was not what it was, you were talking about 20 years ago,
yeah.
right? And so when you went with a certain vendor, you were locked in for a very long time. But now there's so much interoperability, and then going back to just kind of like the container standards, the OCI standards, where it's the packaging can easily be moved. How many services are out there like that just take a Docker file and then create a container out of it? Everybody has that, right? So what that used to be, 10 years ago, used to be very difficult because I had a certain packaging standard, you had a different one, but now it's all the same. So moving that is becoming fairly trivial. So I think when we talk about vendor lock-in, I think we have to really dig and understand what is the cost and what am I getting out of this managed service.
Yep. So I think I'll just add on to it. I think it really depends how much of these platforms you use, whether you dig deep into extensions and plugins and use these features that people have built for you, or whether you think about things like, how am I going to debug this? How am I going to work on it? How does my developer figure out what things have gone wrong? And when you think about that, you kind of have to think about like the local developer experience, and then you pull things back to, well, maybe I should just avoid using that and write a script that a developer can use locally, and we run the exact same thing on CI. And then when you get to it, you're not really too locked in because you've abstracted it away to a shell script, a PowerShell script, a Docker container, something along those lines. And you can move those between platforms very easily. So at the end of the day, it's more about flow control and reporting and UI, and it's not so much about what you've built, and then you can move between those with not too much difficulty, obviously depending on how complex it is, but yeah.
With a big asterisk, your mileage may vary.
Thank you. My next question is about this transformation again. Some industries, they fully embraced cloud and continuous delivery and DevOps, but some industries are lagging behind. And those industries, some of their workloads might still be on like remote edge sites, and they may still need to be containerized, but still their pipelines will need to operate against like public clouds, local data centers, or remote edge sites. Like how the future continuous delivery pipelines would look like to satisfy these needs operating against different target environments.
I think I tried to answer it once. Is basically it's kind of unify, have a proper abstraction, because there's a lot of technical companies are participating in Kubernetes, basically trying to figure out, edge system, even if it's just a cell tower, they can run a single node Kubernetes cluster. Then they can package the software the same way they package it in the data center. They can push that to everywhere. I think that kind of like, to me, is a clean solution. Not sure whether that will be the standard, but I'm thinking that's a good direction to explore.
I think things like pull-based delivery combined with like events, so rather than you having delivery solutions pushing everything, if your deployed systems will pull when they're notified of changes, I think it makes those sort of models a lot easier. So things like GitOps have came in, and on top of Kubernetes and whatnot, and then these applications on the edge can get notified when there's new ones, and then they can update themselves. And if they go offline, it doesn't matter. You may not be able to contact them all the time, but they'll come online when they can, and they'll fetch updates and manage themselves in that sort of way.
Well, this goes to using event models for even just deciding when to update things. You know, you put something out on a queue, and then someone subscribes to those changes, and then or something subscribes to those changes and pulls their choices. It makes it a lot more capable to be individualized in a way that when that pull happens, it requests what that group needs or what that location needs in a way that is more meaningful.
Yep. Okay, thank you. So we have about 3 minutes left, and I want to ask a final question to all of you. Given that we are at CDCon and we have our community with us here in person and virtually, what would be your one, ask from our community that could help change how the future of continuous delivery would look like? What our community would be focusing?
I'll give the first question. Come participate in the open source projects that exist. Come share your use cases. Come ask for new things. Come offer time. Come offer documentation writing. Come participate. That's the best way to control, manage, and help the future of CI and CD.
I'm more from the technical perspective. I'm truly believing the declarative. So means we have this new concept called IAC, AAC, all kind of like as code. I feel keep saying that Kubernetes is a good abstraction. It doesn't have to be Kubernetes, but in the end, the declarative manner will keep a lot of things to be much cleaner. Basically, that's how you deploy things and manage things in the end. Isaac?
I am going to go back to the human side, which is I think the best thing that we could do is to be kind to each other. And I know that sounds weird, but there's so much change happening and so many people being affected by this technological change. And we were talking about people's jobs, right? And those jobs change, and it's not easy for a lot of people to have their jobs that have been the same to change. They think it's going to go away. I think the more we can be kind to each other, the more we can listen to each other, and help people transition from what they were doing before to what they're doing now. I think the faster we will move on in CD.
Yeah, I think back to what Sarah's saying, it's just about talking to each other. So go out and talk to our users, ask them how they're doing things, go out and talk to other people at different companies, see how they're doing what they're doing. Are they doing CD? Are they not? How are they doing it? I bet they'll be doing it a different way than how you're doing it. Talking to people here today, I find different ways, different methods, different pipelines, different compliance needs that different organizations have. And it's really interesting. And you can bring those back into your organization or share on how different people are doing things. I think that is really important.
that, we come to the end of our panel. Thank you, Sarah, Hong, Isaac, and team. Thank you very much. And
Thank you
please,
to the audience.
thank you.